At 91 years old, Michael Caine has finally spoken out about his old friend Sean Connery, and what he revealed is leaving fans stunned. For decades, rumors surrounded Connery's life off-screen. Now, Caine is confirming details that many thought would never see the light of day. Join us as we explore the truth behind the headlines and uncover the real story of Sean Connery that Hollywood tried to keep quiet. The secret struggles behind James Bond. Sean Connery's story didn't begin with tuxedos, martinis, or red carpets. It began in Edinburgh, Scotland, in a poor working-class neighborhood where survival mattered more than dreams. Born in 1930, Thomas Sean Connery grew up in a family that struggled to make ends meet. His father was a factory worker, his mother a cleaner. Money was always short, and from an early age, Connery knew what hard work felt like. As a boy, he left school young and took whatever jobs he could find. One of the first was delivering milk in Edinburgh. He would ride his route in the early mornings, carrying bottles door to door, learning the meaning of responsibility long before most kids his age. He also picked up odd jobs, polishing coffins, mixing cement, and working as a lifeguard. He hustled constantly, not for luxury, but just to get by. The family didn't have extras, and Connery carried that memory of scarcity for the rest of his life. As he grew older, his natural size and strength opened doors. He joined the Royal Navy as a teenager, but health issues cut his service short. Back in civilian life, he worked more temporary jobs before drifting into bodybuilding. It wasn't about vanity, it was about discipline and opportunity. His sculpted build won him small competitions and led to a surprising path: modeling, then stage acting. He started as a background player, picking up tiny parts in theater productions and bit roles on television. But the acting grind was brutal. Connery had no formal training and carried the heavy accent of his Edinburgh roots. Casting directors dismissed him as rough around the edges. He was often broke, bouncing between cheap rooms or crashing on friends' couches. At one point, he nearly gave up on acting altogether. The struggle wore him down, and Hollywood seemed a world away from where he stood. Then came James Bond. When producers of Dr. No began searching for the man to bring Ian Fleming's Spy to life, Connery wasn't the obvious choice. Other actors were considered, including more polished names with established reputations. Connery was raw, unrefined, even considered too street. But when he walked into the room, something clicked. He had a physical presence that couldn't be taught, rugged, confident, and unpredictable. He didn't just act suave. He looked like a man who could actually kill if the situation demanded it. Fleming himself had doubts at first, but audiences didn't. Once Dr. No hit theaters in 1962, Sean Connery wasn't just an actor, he was Bond. And overnight, the boy who once delivered milk was the face of the biggest spy franchise in the world. Becoming Bond made Connery famous beyond his wildest imagination, but fame came with a cost he hadn't expected. To the public, Sean Connery wasn't a man with flaws, doubts, or fears. He was James Bond, perfect, smooth, untouchable. The tuxedo, the martini, the slow smile. Audiences wanted that 24 hours a day. Michael Caine, one of Connery's closest friends, later recalled how suffocating this was. He said, "Connery would complain that they won't let me be anyone else." No matter what role he took, people only saw Bond. If Connery played a soldier, viewers said he was still Bond in uniform. If he played a thief or a detective, audiences whispered it was just Bond in disguise. The role was so powerful, it erased everything else. For Connery, this wasn't admiration. It was a prison. Fame meant he couldn't go to dinner without someone leaning over and reciting the iconic line, "Bond, James Bond." Reporters wanted Bond stories, fans wanted Bond autographs, and studios wanted Bond sequels. The real man was lost behind the brand. Connery earned millions, but in private, he told friends he felt trapped by the character that gave him everything. The weight was psychological. He had worked his way up from nothing, only to find himself stuck in an image he didn't control. Bond wasn't just a role anymore. It had become his identity, stamped on him whether he wanted it or not. On screen, Connery projected calm and control. Off-screen, however, his frustration often boiled over. Stories from film sets describe him clashing with directors, ripping up pages of scripts he thought were weak, and demanding changes in the middle of shooting. He wasn't shy about throwing his weight around, and Hollywood insiders quickly labeled him difficult. But according to Michael Caine, it wasn't just arrogance, it was anger at being boxed in. Connery felt studios cared less about quality and more about cashing in on Bond. He wanted strong writing, believable plots, and respect for the craft of acting. When he didn't get it, his temper flared. To outsiders, it looked like ego, but to Caine, it was a desperate fight to protect himself from being swallowed whole by a fake image. Caine remembered nights when Connery would call him in frustration. The two friends would talk for hours about the emptiness of Hollywood parties, the fake smiles, and the endless backstabbing. Connery, beneath the armor, was a man who loved acting but despised the circus that came with it. The phoniness of the industry disgusted him. He would rage about the way people changed as soon as someone became famous. The flattery, the lies, the deals whispered behind closed doors. What the world saw was a suave spy who never lost control. What Caine saw was a man who carried deep resentment, whose anger at Hollywood wasn't just about work, it was about his very sense of self. Connery's battles with Hollywood weren't just emotional, they were financial and legal too. He famously fought producers over profits from the Bond films, accusing them of cheating him out of money he had rightfully earned. He even took studios to court, unwilling to let powerful executives exploit him. This was rare for actors at the time, and it earned him enemies in high places. His clashes went beyond Bond. Connery often rejected roles, even those worth millions, if he didn't trust the people behind the project. He was selective to the point of self-sabotage, preferring to walk away rather than compromise. This stubborn streak cost him opportunities, but he never regretted it. The dark controversies that refused to die. Sean Connery's image was built on charm, sophistication, and the kind of confidence that could silence a room. But in 1965, during the height of his James Bond fame, he gave an interview that would shadow him for the rest of his life. Speaking with Playboy magazine, Connery openly defended the idea of slapping women in certain situations. He claimed that when all other alternatives fail, he believed hitting a woman could be justified. These weren't vague words taken out of context. They were clear, printed, and unmistakable. Coming from the man celebrated as the ultimate gentleman spy, the statement shocked many even in the 1960s. At that time, conversations around domestic violence were far less public than today, but Connery's remarks still landed like a bomb. Fans and critics alike struggled to reconcile the smooth screen idol with a man who openly endorsed behavior that caused real harm. The issue didn't fade with time. More than 20 years later, in 1987, Barbara Walters confronted Connery about those comments in a televised interview. Walters asked him directly if he stood by what he had said in Playboy. Without hesitation, Connery repeated that yes, under certain circumstances, he still thought it was acceptable. He sat calmly, smirked slightly, and doubled down in front of millions of viewers. For Michael Caine, Connery's longtime friend, this was a turning point. Caine later admitted that those words haunted Connery for the rest of his life. It wasn't just a mistake or an offhand remark. It became a permanent stain on his reputation, one he never managed to shake off. The backlash was fierce and lasted for decades. Women's groups condemned him. Protests erupted outside theaters where his movies premiered. Boycotts were organized, and his once polished image began to show cracks. Directors and studios grew nervous. They feared the controversy would overshadow their projects. Some filmmakers chose not to work with him, worried that the headlines about his comments would drown out promotion for the films. Even when Connery delivered strong performances, the conversation often circled back to his views on women. Hollywood public relations teams tried desperately to contain the damage. Some claimed his words had been misunderstood. Others argued it was simply of the time, as if that excused the statement. Connery himself, however, refused to let PR teams spin his position. He was blunt, unyielding and uninterested in softening the blow. Instead of healing the wound, his refusal to explain or backtrack kept the controversy alive. By the 2000s, the criticism followed him all the way back to Scotland. When Connery was scheduled to appear at the Scottish Parliament for a public event, protesters threatened to shut it down. They carried signs referencing his Playboy comments and demanded accountability. In the end, the event was overshadowed, proof that his words from decades earlier had never truly gone away. What might have been a passing scandal for another actor turned into a defining issue for Connery because he never once offered an apology. The controversies didn't stop at interviews. In 2006, Connery's ex-wife, actress Diane Cilento, published a memoir that reignited old questions. In it, she described their marriage as turbulent and painful. Cilento claimed Connery had been emotionally abusive and at times physically violent. She painted a picture of explosive tempers, manipulation, and a relationship marked by fear. For fans who already wrestled with Connery's Playboy remarks, these allegations cut even deeper. The idea that the charismatic leading man who played the world's most desirable spy might also have been abusive at home was devastating. The memoir added a layer of personal detail that no studio could explain away. On top of that, Hollywood insiders whispered about Connery's controlling nature on set. Crew members and co-stars described a man who often demanded things be done his way. Some said he was quick to anger if people challenged him. Others believed his behavior extended into his personal life, that he needed to be in charge in every situation. What made the controversies last so long wasn't only the interviews or the allegations. It was Connery's reaction. He simply refused to back down. Over and over, advisors, friends, and publicists urged him to apologize, or at least soften his stance. He refused. He saw it as weakness to admit he was wrong. It cost him roles. Studios worried that casting him would attract unwanted controversy. It cost him public goodwill, as fans who once adored him struggled to reconcile the image of Bond with a man who would not step back from troubling comments. It also cost him peace of mind. Even in interviews late in his career, he bristled when asked about the subject. The paradox was striking. On screen, Sean Connery was the ultimate gentleman, charming, protective, respectful, and effortlessly attractive. Off-screen, the same man was haunted by accusations that painted him as the opposite. He represented sophistication for generations of moviegoers, but behind the curtain, he carried the weight of words and actions that never truly left him. Michael Caine said Connery's refusal to bend made him admirable in some ways, but doomed in others. He wouldn't lie to make people like him, but he also wouldn't admit fault, even when the truth was staring him in the face. That refusal meant Connery lived with controversy longer than most actors could survive. His career survived because of his undeniable talent and star power, but the shadow of those scandals always followed him. They became part of the story, impossible to separate from the man himself. Why he abandoned Hollywood and never looked back. Sean Connery's long and complicated relationship with Hollywood reached its breaking point in 2003. By then, he was already a legend, an Oscar-winning actor with decades of success behind him. But his last film, The League of Extraordinary Gentlemen, was the one that finally pushed him over the edge. The movie was meant to be a big-budget comic book adaptation that could start a new franchise. Connery signed on for a massive paycheck, but once filming began, it quickly turned into a nightmare. He clashed constantly with the director, Stephen Norrington. Crew members later described their relationship as explosive. Connery accused Norrington of being inexperienced and disorganized, while Norrington pushed back against Connery's controlling presence on set. Arguments broke out so often that some scenes were said to have been rewritten or shot only after shouting matches. Connery wasn't shy about his feelings. He began openly criticizing the people running the production, not just Norrington, but studio executives as well. He called industry leaders idiots in interviews and behind closed doors, a sign of how little patience he had left. What might have been another blockbuster became a disaster, both financially and personally. The movie underperformed, reviews were harsh, and Connery walked away bitter. Michael Caine later explained that Connery had been frustrated with Hollywood for years, but this experience was the last straw. He was tired of battling studios, tired of arguing with directors, and tired of carrying films that he no longer believed in. According to Caine, Connery told him he had had enough of the idiots running the industry. He wasn't willing to waste his time fighting people who, in his view, cared more about money and marketing than about good storytelling. After The League of Extraordinary Gentlemen, Connery didn't just retire from movies. He walked away entirely. After leaving Hollywood, Connery didn't stay in Los Angeles or London, where the industry might pull him back in. Instead, he moved permanently to the Bahamas. It was more than just a new home. It was an escape. By this point, studios were still offering him millions to return. Sequels, cameos, new roles. The money was there. But Connery turned it all down. He no longer cared about the paychecks or the fame. He cared about peace. Moving to the Bahamas gave him exactly that. Far from Hollywood, he could live on his own terms without paparazzi following him to restaurants or fans demanding Bond quotes at every turn. Locals in the Bahamas described him as both aloof and charming. He wasn't a man who mingled constantly, but when people did meet him, he could still turn on the charisma that made him famous. He wasn't unfriendly, he simply valued his privacy. Residents recalled how he would sometimes stroll through town, still commanding attention without trying. Others remembered him enjoying quiet days near the water, far removed from the chaos of his old life. This wasn't the life of a retired star still clinging to the spotlight. It was the life of someone who had chosen to disappear, someone who wanted distance from an industry he no longer respected. What made Connery's retirement different from others was how complete it was. He didn't just slow down or take smaller roles. He vanished from the public eye. He refused interviews, skipped awards ceremonies, and rarely appeared at Hollywood events. Even when he was honored with Lifetime Achievement tributes, he declined to attend. Connery despised the red carpet culture. He didn't want to pose for photographers or smile for crowds. He wasn't interested in Hollywood parties where, as he once complained to Michael Caine, everyone smiled to your face and stabbed you in the back once you turned around. For Connery, walking away wasn't just about leaving acting. It was about rejecting the entire celebrity lifestyle. By choosing the Bahamas, Connery created a bubble where he could finally live as Sean, not Bond. He spent his days painting, reading, and enjoying the quiet company of his wife, Micheline. Friends who visited said he seemed lighter, as if the weight of Hollywood had finally been lifted off his shoulders. For years, rumors swirled that he might make a comeback. Studios kept dangling offers, hoping to lure him out of retirement with eye-popping salaries. He never accepted. To Connery, the decision was final. He had made peace with leaving it all behind. He didn't want the spotlight anymore. He wanted freedom, and he had found it. The private pain no one saw coming. To the outside world, Sean Connery seemed to have everything: money, fame, respect, and a picture-perfect life in the Bahamas. But behind the closed doors of his private world, he carried personal struggles that very few people ever saw. One of the deepest wounds came from his relationship with his only son, Jason Connery. Jason followed in his father's footsteps and became an actor and director, but their bond was complicated. Friends close to the family said their arguments were legendary. Both men were strong-willed, proud, and stubborn. Small disagreements often exploded into long silences. At times, years would pass where father and son barely spoke. Michael Caine, who was close to both of them, always described the situation carefully. He said, "They were two proud Scotsmen who couldn't say what they felt." Connery loved his son, and Jason loved him back, but neither man was good at showing it. Pride and tempers often got in the way of simple expressions of affection. For Connery, who grew up tough and rarely shared emotions openly, fatherhood was never easy. And for Jason, living under the shadow of a world-famous parent brought its own pressure. Even in later years, when Connery had retired from Hollywood, the tension remained. While they did have moments of reconciliation, the distance between them was something that never fully disappeared. For a man who seemed unstoppable on screen, the inability to fix his most important family bond was a private pain that never left him. The final years. Another battle that Connery faced in his later years was with time itself. Throughout his life, he had been strong, sharp, and in control. That control meant everything to him. He had walked away from Hollywood at the peak of his career because he refused to let others dictate his choices. But aging brought a kind of fight that he could not win. Connery had a deep fear of losing control, especially of being trapped in hospitals surrounded by strangers and machines. He hated the idea of dependency and often told those close to him that he wanted to live and die on his own terms. Unfortunately, life gave him a much harsher reality. In his final years, Connery developed Alzheimer's disease. At first, it came quietly. He would forget small details, stumble over words, or lose track of conversations. For a man once admired for his wit and intelligence, these slips were painful. Michael Caine, who had known him for decades, later recalled how difficult it was to watch his sharp mind fade piece by piece. Connery, once quick with jokes and opinions, struggled with confusion and memory loss. As the disease advanced, the man who had commanded film sets with a single glare began to lose awareness of the world around him. It was heartbreaking for those closest to him. Friends who called or visited sometimes left in tears, realizing that Connery no longer recognized them. The contrast between the indestructible James Bond on screen and the vulnerable man in real life could not have been greater. Despite the painful decline, Connery was not alone. His wife, Micheline Roquebrune, became his anchor. The two had been married since 1975, and their bond only grew stronger as Connery's health weakened. Micheline was fiercely protective of him. She refused to hand over his care to strangers or outside professionals. Even when help was offered, she turned it down, determined that she would be the one to look after him. She stayed by his side every day, ensuring that his final years were as dignified as possible. For her, it wasn't about keeping up appearances, it was about love and loyalty. Connery had always valued privacy, and Micheline respected that to the very end. Even as the disease progressed, there were rare and precious moments when flashes of the old Sean came through. Micheline and Caine both remembered times when he would make a sharp comment, deliver a witty remark, or flash that famous smile. Those moments reminded them of who he really was beneath the illness, and they treasured them. Connery's greatest fear was dying in a hospital, and Micheline made sure that didn't happen. When it became clear that the end was near, she honored his wish. He passed away peacefully at home in the Bahamas, in his own bed, with the sound of the ocean outside and his wife nearby. For a man who had spent his entire career fighting for control, it was the closest thing to leaving life on his own terms. His death in 2020 brought global tributes. Fans celebrated him as the ultimate James Bond, Scotland's national treasure, and one of the most charismatic actors of all time. But for Michael Caine, the grief was deeply personal. He wasn't mourning a character or a legend. He was mourning his old friend, a man who was brilliant, flawed, stubborn, and loyal in ways the public would never fully understand. The rumors Hollywood doesn't want you to hear. For all of Sean Connery's fame and power, there were times when Hollywood quietly turned its back on him. On the surface, it looked like he was simply taking breaks between films, but whispers inside the industry suggested something else: blacklisting. Connery had a reputation for fighting studios over money, contracts, and creative control. He was known to walk out of meetings if he felt disrespected, and he didn't hesitate to call executives idiots when he believed they mishandled projects. This defiance made him popular with fans, but dangerous for studios that relied on order and control. Over the years, stories surfaced of major producers quietly freezing him out. Scripts that had once been lined up for him suddenly disappeared. Studio offers slowed down, even though audiences still wanted to see him on screen. The official explanation was usually that Connery was being selective, But insiders claimed that wasn't always true. Some believed the studios had grown tired of his demands and were deliberately keeping him at arm's length. There were even rumors that money changed hands to keep certain stories quiet. Connery was known for explosive arguments on set, and some accounts claimed that studios paid hush money to crew members or associates to stop those stories from leaking. Hollywood was invested in protecting the suave James Bond image, not the fiery temper that came with the man who played him. Part of what fueled the gossip was how closely Connery sometimes seemed to live like his famous character. The line between James Bond and Sean Connery blurred in ways that fascinated and unsettled people. He was often spotted at glamorous casinos in Monte Carlo, dressed as sharply as he was on screen, with crowds watching him play high-stakes games. To some, it looked like he was carrying Bond into real life. Rumors swirled about whirlwind affairs, private parties, and a lifestyle that was far more secretive than the public ever knew. Some insiders even claimed Connery turned down film roles because they felt too close to the truth. Scripts that featured characters with gambling problems, secret double lives, or controlling personalities supposedly reminded him too much of himself, and he wanted no part of exposing those similarities on screen. Whether those stories were exaggerated or not, they added to the mystique that surrounded him. Unlike many actors, Connery did little to dispel the rumors. He neither confirmed nor denied them, which only made them grow. Fans who wanted to see him as Bond believed he really lived that life, and critics who disliked him pointed to the gossip as proof of arrogance. On film sets, Connery's personality created even more controversy. Crew members and co-stars often described him as a perfectionist who wanted everything done his way. He was notorious for tearing up scripts he thought were weak and demanding rewrites on the spot. Directors who tried to rein him in frequently clashed with him, sometimes leading to shouting matches in front of the crew. For some, this behavior looked like pure ego, a movie star who thought he knew better than everyone else. For others, it was a sign of professionalism. Connery believed in protecting the quality of the films he worked on, and if he thought something was wrong, he refused to stay quiet. Michael Caine defended him in a more balanced way. He admitted Connery could be difficult, but he explained that it often came from passion rather than vanity. Connery cared deeply about how films turned out, and he hated when directors or producers seemed careless. Caine argued that what others called control-freak behavior was really Connery's way of fighting for high standards. Still, the stories piled up. Tales of Connery rewriting dialogue, refusing direction, or walking off sets became part of his legend. To studio executives, this made him risky. To admirers, it made him uncompromising. Either way, it kept fueling the sense that Connery was more complicated than the charming spy people saw on screen. If you enjoyed this, don't forget to like the video, subscribe to the channel, and hit the bell icon so you never miss the next video.